It's almost midnight. You're staring at that text. You know if you send it now, you won't sleep. There's one sentence that stops the spiral before it starts. You're at your desk, Slack open, watching your message sit there with no reply, and your stomach starts doing that quiet drop like you just got in trouble. A few minutes later you reread their last sentence, notice it's shorter than usual, and your mind immediately starts building a case against you. By the time you look up, you're not even working anymore, you're scanning for proof that something is wrong. Here's the slightly painful truth, you're not too sensitive, you're too fast to interpret. You're taking incomplete information and turning it into a verdict about your worth, your safety, and your place with other people. Here's a sentence you can use today. I don't know what this means yet, so I'm not going to decide for myself. Say it out loud the moment you feel that mental grab, the moment you want to decode tone or silence like it's a secret message. In the next 10 minutes, this keeps you from firing off a defensive follow-up, it stops you from doom-scrolling through the chat history for clues, and it gives you enough space to return to what you were doing with your dignity intact. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. This problem has a name in real life, even if you've never labeled it, the constant personalizing of neutral events. A delayed text feels like disrespect. A coworker's K feels like anger. A friend canceling feels like rejection. And it's exhausting because you're living as if every interaction is a test you might fail. The stakes aren't just feelings. At work, it makes you hesitate to ask direct questions, so you lose time and clarity and sometimes miss opportunities because you're trying to read minds instead of getting facts. With money, it can show up as impulse decisions, over-apologizing to a client, over-discounting, over-explaining, because you're trying to buy back approval you think you lost. In relationships, it can quietly poison closeness, because you start punishing people for crimes they never committed, pulling away, getting cold, getting clingy, or rehearsing arguments in your head that never actually happen. And here's the cleanest what this is costing you line, it's costing you peace during moments that should be neutral. You're paying an emotional tax on ordinary life. Today you're going to learn how to catch the exact mental habit that turns a neutral moment into a personal attack, before it hardens into a mood you carry for hours. You're going to learn how to protect your work life and relationships from constant overreading, so you can communicate clearly without fear. And you're going to learn how to enjoy more quiet inside your own head, instead of constantly scanning for signs that you're not enough. Stay with me until the very end, and while you're here, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. First, you'll learn a simple way to pause the meaning-making machine in your mind so you stop turning maybe into they hate me. Next, you'll learn how to separate what happened from what you assumed, so you can respond to reality instead of reacting to a story. Then, you'll practice a calm inner script that keeps your self-respect steady even when someone's tone is sharp or their timing is messy. Finally, you'll know how to carry this into the moments that usually wreck your evening, so you can finish the day without spiraling or replaying conversations in bed. And I want to open a loop right now because it's probably the most common place you lose control, that moment at night when you send a message you care about, and the response doesn't come, and your brain starts narrating a whole breakup, a whole rejection, a whole humiliation. Later, I'm going to walk you through that exact scenario, late reply, vague tone, your heart speeding up, and show you how to stop the spiral without pretending you don't care, so you can keep your calm and still keep your standards. Here's the sentence to use before anything else happens. There are at least 3 explanations for this, and I'm only seeing one. Say it the moment your mind locks onto a single interpretation and starts tightening around it. When you use this sentence, the urgency drops. You don't feel calm yet, but you feel less trapped, and that's enough to regain control. This works because your brain is wired to close open loops as fast as possible. Uncertainty feels unsafe, so your mind grabs the first explanation that fits the emotion you're already feeling. If you're tired, stressed, or already doubting yourself, that explanation will usually be personal and negative. By forcing yourself to acknowledge multiple explanations, you interrupt the brain's rush to certainty. You're not trying to be positive. You're creating space. And space is what stops emotional overreaction. Picture a common North American work moment. You send a project update to your manager on a Tuesday morning. Normally they reply within an hour. This time, nothing. Noon passes. Still nothing. You start thinking you missed something, or the work wasn't good enough, or they're disappointed and deciding how to respond. Your posture changes. You check email again. You reread what you sent. You start preemptively drafting an apology in your head. All of this happens without new information. Nothing actually changed except the story. Now apply the sentence. There are at least 3 explanations for this, and I'm only seeing one. The other explanations don't need to be comforting. They just need to be plausible. They could be in meetings. They could be dealing with something urgent. They could have seen it and planned to reply later. The key isn't which explanation is correct. The key is breaking the illusion that your painful interpretation is the only reasonable one. Once that illusion breaks, your nervous system stops escalating. Here's the tiny action to take today. The next time you notice yourself checking a message more than once, stop and name 3 explanations silently. They don't need to be nice, just non-personal. Do this once, then physically turn back to what you were doing. Even if the discomfort lingers, you've already prevented it from running the show. Now slow this down for 10 seconds. Feel where the reaction lives in your body. Maybe it's tightness in your chest or pressure behind your eyes. Take one slow breath and let your shoulders drop on the exhale. You're not fixing the situation. You're signaling to your body that there is no immediate threat. That signal matters more than convincing thoughts right now. Notice how this ties back to that late-night message I mentioned earlier. The problem was never the silence itself. The problem was collapsing uncertainty into a personal verdict. When you keep uncertainty open just a little longer, your emotional world becomes quieter and more manageable. One more thing to anchor this. You don't need certainty to function well. You need enough clarity to act with self-respect. This tool doesn't make you passive or detached. It makes you accurate. You can still follow up. You can still ask questions. But now you're doing it from steadiness, not from fear of being disliked or abandoned. If you practice this once today, even imperfectly, you'll notice something important. The emotional spike doesn't last as long. It still shows up, but it burns off faster. And that's the beginning of emotional control, not eliminating reactions, but shortening their lifespan so they don't dominate your day. You're walking out of a meeting and you can feel it sitting in your chest. Someone gave feedback, or maybe they just moved on faster than you expected, and your mind grabs onto one moment that felt off. On the drive home, you replay a single sentence again and again, changing the tone each time, imagining what they really meant. By the time you get home, you're no longer reacting to the meeting itself, you're reacting to the version of it your mind has been rehearsing. The mistake here isn't caring. It's assuming that your first emotional interpretation is the most accurate one. When something feels personal, you treat that feeling like evidence, instead of like a signal that needs checking. Here's the correction, and it's simple but uncomfortable at first: separate impact from intent. The rule sounds like this in your head: this affected me, but I don't yet know why it happened. That sentence matters because it keeps you honest. It allows you to acknowledge the emotional hit without assigning motive or meaning prematurely. This works because emotions are fast, but explanations don't have to be. Your nervous system reacts before your reasoning catches up. When you collapse those 2 steps into one, you end up treating feelings as facts. By splitting them apart, you regain choice. You're no longer arguing with your emotions or obeying them blindly. You're letting them exist without letting them dictate your story. Let's ground this in a realistic moment. A friend cancels plans with you the day of. The text is short. No emojis. No apology that feels warm enough. Immediately, the impact hits: disappointment, maybe embarrassment, maybe the old thought that you care more than they do. That part is real. But then intent gets filled in automatically. They don't value you. You're not a priority. You shouldn't have asked in the first place. None of that was in the message. It was added later. Apply the correction. This affected me, but I don't yet know why it happened. Now the situation changes. You still feel disappointed, but you're not building a case. You're not rehearsing a speech. You're not silently punishing them. You're staying in contact with reality instead of drifting into interpretation. Here's the tiny action to practice today. The next time you feel hurt or irritated by someone's behavior, write or say 2 short sentences in your head. First, the impact on me was _____. Name the feeling plainly. Second, the intent is unknown. Stop there. Don't fill it in. Don't fix it. Just pause. This takes less than 30 seconds, and it prevents hours of emotional fallout. Now interrupt the pattern physically for a moment. Ask yourself this question and actually wait for an answer. What proof do I have, right now? If the only proof you have is a feeling, that's your cue to slow down. Take one breath that's longer on the exhale than the inhale. Let your jaw unclench. This isn't about calming down completely. It's about not escalating. Notice how this shifts your posture in situations that normally trigger you. Instead of shrinking, over-explaining, or becoming guarded, you stay neutral. You don't chase reassurance, and you don't withdraw to protect yourself. You remain available without being exposed. This also connects directly to that late-night message scenario we opened earlier. The silence impacts you. That's real. But the intent behind the silence is unknown. When you keep those two separate, you don't spiral into imagined rejection. You stay present enough to sleep, to rest, to continue your life without dragging unresolved tension into everything else. Here's the deeper payoff. When you stop assigning intent automatically, you stop living as if you're constantly being evaluated. Your sense of self becomes less dependent on other people's moods, tone, or availability. You still care, but you're no longer fragile. And that's what emotional control actually looks like in practice. It's not numbness. It's stability under uncertainty. If this feels subtle, that's because it is. And subtle changes are the ones that last. You're training yourself to respond to what you know, not to what you fear. Over time, that habit reshapes how safe the world feels to you, moment by moment. Here's a belief that quietly fuels a lot of emotional suffering. If something feels personal, it probably is. That belief sounds reasonable when you're tired, stressed, or already doubting yourself, but under pressure it becomes dangerous. It convinces you that your emotional reaction is a signal of truth, not just a signal of activation. And once you believe that, every tense moment feels like confirmation. The correction here matters because the stakes are higher under stress. The instruction is this: treat emotional intensity as a reason to slow down, not a reason to conclude. When pressure is high, accuracy drops. That's not a personal flaw. That's how nervous systems work. Here's the script to use when things feel charged. Strong feelings don't have a clear meaning. Say it internally the moment your body reacts before your mind catches up. This sentence doesn't deny what you feel. It prevents you from turning volume into certainty. Why this works is simple. Stress narrows perception. When your system is activated, your brain scans for threats and compresses information. Nuance disappears. Everything becomes sharper, louder, and more urgent. If you make meaningful decisions in that state, you're deciding with reduced data. By naming the intensity as intensity, you keep yourself from mistaking it for insight. Picture a high-pressure moment most people recognize. You're in a meeting, presenting an idea, and someone interrupts you or challenges a point quickly. Your heart jumps. Your face gets warm. Your mind starts racing to defend, justify, or shut down. In that split second, the belief kicks in: they're dismissing you, they don't respect you, and you sound stupid. That belief feels true because your body is reacting strongly. Now apply the instruction. Strong feelings don't have a clear meaning. You don't say it to calm yourself down completely. You say it to buy a few seconds. Those seconds are enough to stop you from snapping, over-explaining, or mentally checking out. You listen instead of bracing. You ask one clarifying question instead of launching into defense. The meeting continues, and afterward you realize the interruption wasn't personal at all. But even if it was, you handled it with control. Here's the slow practice moment, and it matters here more than anywhere else. When you feel that surge, plant your feet lightly into the floor and take one breath where the exhale is longer than the inhale. Let your shoulders drop just a bit. This isn't a relaxation exercise. It's a signal to your nervous system that you're not under immediate threat. That signal gives your thinking room to come back online. Notice how this holds under pressure in places where you usually lose yourself. A partner's sharp tone at the end of a long day. A delayed payment notification. A client pushing back on a boundary. In each case, the feeling is strong, and the temptation is to conclude immediately. When you interrupt that conclusion, you don't become passive. You become deliberate. This also sets up the moment we're going to walk through together soon. There's a scenario where this belief gets stress-tested more than anywhere else, when you're alone, tired, and replaying a situation with no new information coming in. That's where intensity feels most convincing, and that's where this tool protects you the most. Here's the deeper shift you're making. You're learning to respect your emotions without letting them appoint themselves as judges. You're no longer asking, "What does this mean about me?" in the heat of the moment. You're asking, "What information do I actually have right now?" That question keeps you grounded when everything in you wants to rush. Emotional control under pressure isn't about suppressing reactions. It's about postponing conclusions until your full capacity is available. When you do that, you stop creating unnecessary conflicts, you preserve your self-respect, and you walk away from intense moments without carrying them for the rest of the day. It's late in the evening, and you're sitting on the edge of your bed with your phone in your hand. Earlier today, you sent a message that mattered. It wasn't casual. It wasn't a throwaway. It was the kind of message where the response feels like it says something about you. Hours have passed. The screen is quiet. Your body is tired, but your mind is alert, scanning. At first, you tell yourself you're fine. Then the old reaction starts to creep in. You check the timestamp. You reread what you sent. You notice how carefully you worded it, and now it feels exposed. A familiar story tries to take over. You said too much. You should have waited. They're pulling away. You can feel the emotional wave building, ready to carry you into a spiral. This is where the old pattern almost wins. Your fingers hover over the screen, tempted to send a follow-up that's half apology, half explanation. You can feel that urge in your chest, that pressure to fix something before it breaks, even though nothing has actually happened yet. Then you pause. The first tool comes in quietly. There are at least 3 explanations for this, and I'm only seeing one. You don't try to convince yourself of the best-case scenario. You just loosen your grip on the worst one. You name a few alternatives without drama. They could be busy. They could be offline. They could have seen it and planned to reply later. The urgency drops a notch. Not gone, but manageable. The second tool follows. This affected me, but I don't yet know why it happened. You let yourself acknowledge the impact. You feel the disappointment, the vulnerability, the small sting of not knowing. You stop there. You don't assign intent. You don't turn it into a verdict about your importance or your value. The story loses momentum. Your body still feels activated, so you slow it down. You place both feet on the floor and take one breath with a longer exhale than inhale. Your shoulders release slightly. Your jaw unclenches. This isn't about calming down completely. It's about stopping escalation. You're telling your nervous system that this moment doesn't require defense or retreat. The phone is still quiet, but something important has changed. You're no longer bracing. You're no longer negotiating your self-worth against a notification. You notice the temptation to check again, and instead of fighting it, you let it pass. You put the phone face down. A few minutes later, another thought tries to sneak in. Maybe this silence means something after all. This is where the third tool holds the line. Strong feelings don't have a clear meaning. You remind yourself that the intensity you feel is a product of fatigue, timing, and importance, not necessarily truth. You don't argue with the feeling. You just don't let it decide. You get up and go through your evening routine. The night doesn't turn into a replay loop. You don't rehearse conversations. You don't draft messages you'll never send. There's still a bit of discomfort, but it's contained. It doesn't bleed into everything else. Eventually, you lie down. Your body feels heavier now, calmer. Sleep comes more easily than it usually does on nights like this. And when you wake up in the morning, there's a message waiting. The response is neutral. Kind, even. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loaded. Just a normal reply that arrives when it arrives. What matters isn't that the outcome was fine. What matters is that your night was fine regardless. You didn't give away hours of peace to a story that wasn't confirmed. You didn't punish yourself or the other person for a gap in information. You held your boundary internally. That's the observable outcome. A calmer night. No spiral. No emotional hangover the next day. You show up to your morning with energy instead of residue. And even if the message had been disappointing, you would have met it with steadiness instead of collapse. This is what integration looks like. Not perfection. Not detachment. Just the ability to stay with yourself when uncertainty shows up, and to let reality arrive on its own terms instead of chasing it with fear. At its core, this lesson is about one quiet shift. Reacting pulls you into stories you don't yet have evidence for, while responding keeps you anchored to what's actually happening. When you react, your attention scatters and your energy leaks. When you respond, you stay intentional, present, and grounded in yourself, even when things feel uncertain. First, we slowed down the moment where silence or tone usually grabs you and turns into a verdict about your worth. Then, we learned how to hold uncertainty open instead of collapsing it into a single painful explanation. Next, we separated the impact something has on you from the intent behind it, so feelings could exist without becoming facts. Finally, we stress-tested all of this under pressure, when emotions are loud and your body wants answers immediately. Each step wasn't about changing other people. It was about changing how quickly you hand your piece over to interpretations you can't verify. Here's what to do today, exactly, so this doesn't stay theoretical. First, the next time you notice yourself checking a message, email, or notification a second time, pause and say internally, there are at least 3 explanations for this, and I'm only seeing one. Then physically return your attention to whatever task is in front of you for at least 5 minutes before checking again. Second, when someone's behavior hits you emotionally, name the impact without naming the motive. Say to yourself, this affected me, and the intent is unknown, and stop there. Don't analyze. Don't justify. Let that sentence be the boundary that keeps you from spiraling into imagined meaning. Third, when you feel a surge of intensity in your body, especially late in the day, take one breath where the exhale is longer than the inhale and repeat, strong feelings don't have a clear meaning. Do this once. You're not trying to calm everything down. You're just postponing conclusions until your system is steadier. If you want to keep building on this, the natural next step is learning how to set internal boundaries when other people's moods start leaking into your day. A good follow-up lesson would be something like, how to stay calm when other people are emotionally reactive, because it builds directly on what you practiced here and shows you how to hold your center even when someone else is upset, stressed, or unpredictable. What you're really training with all of this is patience with incomplete information. That might not sound impressive, but it's one of the most powerful forms of emotional control you can develop. Most unnecessary suffering comes from rushing to meaning. Most peace comes from letting meaning arrive on its own. When you stop taking everything personally, you don't become cold or indifferent. You become clearer. You ask better questions. You communicate without edge. You give people room to be human without turning their behavior into a referendum on you. And most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself in moments of uncertainty. You'll still feel things. You'll still care. But you won't be dragged around by every delay, every tone shift, and every silence that used to hook you. Your days become quieter. Your nights become calmer. And your sense of self becomes less dependent on other people's reactions. That's not a personality change. It's a skill. And like any skill, it gets stronger with repetition, not perfection. If you feel messages like this need to reach more people, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.